I'm happy to introduce our guest speaker today. We are joined by Jeremy Thompson from Tucson Unified School District's GATE program. So everyone, please join me in giving a virtual warm welcome to Jeremy by clicking the React button in the bottom of your screen. Jeremy, the virtual floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Lauren. And thank all of you for being here today. But more importantly, thank you for the work that you do. I was really excited to be asked to present a little bit to you today because I share in the values of the organization's efforts to provide opportunities for children, for our student learners, especially in terms of fostering relationships. Uh, I'll be talking a little bit about uh, gifted and talented education and the background behind that a little bit and some of the strategies we use. So when I'm introduced from the Gates department at TUSD, that's the Gifted and Talented Education Department. And I've been doing this. Let's see, I had to ask someone the other day what birthday I was having on the 14th of August. I thought I was turning 58, and it turns out I'm turning 57. So I'm very excited to have an extra year that I had lost someplace. And so I was a student in the Gifted and Talented Education program going back almost 50 years. And in fact, and I started in elementary school and ended up at University High School, which is our gifted and talented high school for Tucson Unified School District. And UHS, University High, is experiencing its 50th anniversary this year. And in my career, one of the first jobs I had in education was I was a PE teacher's assistant in Japan at the American School in Japan in Tokyo. I had graduated high school, gone to college for a year, and I had an opportunity to live in Japan. And while I was there, I needed a little bit of money, and so I got hired by the American School in Japan in Tokyo. And I had never been in education at all in any way. My first degree eventually was in fine art and painting and printmaking, and I had never thought of myself as being a teacher. But that year in Japan, I worked with students from all over the world who were trying to learn how to swim. And some of them, depending on where they came from a cultural backgrounds where water was not something that you just went and swam in. We kind of take it for granted in the West, don't we? We all have swimming pools out here in Arizona. But in the rest of the world, swimming is not something that you just go and do. And for some kids, water is sacred, depending on where they come from. And the use of water and so on is very treasured and valued. So for some of these kids, just getting into a swimming pool was like going to the moon. And what I learned was that the relationship that I had with these students and my ability to have them feel safe with me and to foster trust was really the most important thing. Now, I had to learn at the time, I had to learn uh, Canadian Red Cross. That's how they certified their teachers in Tokyo at the American school. So I had to learn that, and I had to learn some different skills and strategies for working with kids in that environment. But mostly, what I learned wasn't anything that anyone taught me, or I should say, what I learned was the most important parts of what I learned was what children taught me through their energy and their engagements and their comfort, and eventually their success. And so for me, the first time I felt like, wow, I really could be a teacher was when a child, a Sikh child from Pakistan had allowed me to help him learn to float on his back in a swimming pool. And I can still remember to this day looking down at him as my hands slowly drifted away and he was still floating and he's looking up at me and he's got these huge eyes and I'm telling him, "Hey, you're doing this on your own now." And it was just the rush of kind of spirit from him about that and the connection that I made. I still get goosebumps today because I realized like that's the secret, right? Is making yourself available essentially as like a vessel or vehicle for that child's own discovery. And the best way I've learned to do that over years now has been to learn to listen and respond to children so that I can see them as they are and as they wish to be seen. And I think that's the most important skill. And I think for all of you, since you have a lifetime of whether you've been parents and now grandparents or great grandparents, and in all the work that you do with students, I'm sure you've discovered this too, that just the relationship itself is probably the most important takeaway. And through that relationship, all sorts of things can become possible. In fact, a lot of the research that we rely on tells us that our energy or our enthusiasm for what we do with children, matched by giving space for their enthusiasm and interest, are probably the greatest leading indicators of a student's success. More than curriculum, more than specific strategies, more than demographics. And so I just want to make sure that I've planted that seed as we go forward. Um, so when I returned from Japan and I went and got my degree in arts, I thought to myself, well, maybe I'll do art education so that I have a way to pay my bills while I work on becoming a famous painter. And so I did that. And the first job I was offered in the state of Arizona was to go and teach on the Tohono O'odham Reservation in Sells. It was a 90-minute commute one way, and I took a bus to get there. And I felt like I had really no idea what I was doing. But I really passionately wanted to work with those students because I recognize that there must be a great need for teachers like me to recruit me to drive those 90 miles one way to spend time with those kids. And it was very rewarding in that I found I really had to rely mostly on my sensibilities that I had acquired when I was teaching in Japan, and far less on anything that I had learned in a college of education program. After my first year there, a man who was my professor at University High had just been on the school board of Arizona, state of Arizona, and he had written the laws for charter schools and was then retiring and setting up his own charter. And he reached out to me and recruited me as one of his first teachers. And after 5 years, I became his assistant superintendent for curriculum instruction and opened 5 schools across the state of Arizona for low income, at risk students. And then eventually I went and got my master's degree in early childhood in gifted ed and taught gifted education for many years and retired and started consulting with education organizations. And then 2 years ago, the GATE department invited me back as their curriculum support provider. And I've been doing that since then. And it's been a real honor to do what I do now, which is mostly focused on adult education. I model some lessons and teach some classes, but mostly I do things like this with people like you, talking about how we can help students achieve their full potential. And I don't know what could be time better spent. So I really honor all of you and the time that you put in to work with kids. And so today, I mostly just wanted to go over kind of three keys. Um, Extending out from having the right mindset or heart space for working with kids, which I think all of you have, and I think this program does a really great job in fostering and developing. The three keys would really be, from my perspective, uh, who are our gifted students? Um, uh, what kinds of strategies may work best with those students? And to give you one strategy that's a quick and easy takeaway that you can use with any students, um, and uh, and then give space and time for all of you to ask questions or talk further about this topic if you'd like. So, Lauren, can we just check in and make sure everybody's we're good to go with that little preface? Or I can just see thumbs up if everybody's ready for the next part.
Yeah, you can do
Okay,
thumbs up or
terrific.
reactions, everybody.
All right. Thank you so much. All right. So the way the state of Arizona identifies gifted kids. So we have a number of different assessments that are designed to provide the greatest opportunity for placement possible. And these tests do not require students to be able to read and write, but just be able to answer questions about things like spatial reasoning and pattern recognition, relationships, the order of things and objects, and so on, right? So the state of Arizona, unlike many other states, separates out gifted students from special ed students. In many states, gifted education is part of special ed. And the reason is because we recognize that gifted students share a lot of the same attributes as special ed students in a number of ways. One of those is that gifted students tend to have what's called asynchronous brain development. So we're testing children around 5 to 6 years of age. And once they test, they're offered different kinds of placements. In our district, we have self contained, which is the students that test the highest on these cognitive abilities tests, would be offered a classroom with their peers, with other students who also tested high in one of three areas. There's um, uh, like verbal, nonverbal, spatial reasoning, things like that. And then we also have what are called cluster classrooms, where kids who tested almost as high or as high, but are now mainstreamed with other students. So there's a population within a regular ed classroom. And then the third program we offer is pull-out services, where those gifted identified students are offered an hour and a half once a week with a gifted endorsed teacher. The asynchronous development that I mentioned briefly describes how gifted minds are often strong in certain domains, like let's say spatial or conceptual reasoning, but may have delays in other areas. And most importantly, they have delays in what uh, we call the frontal lobe, right? The frontal lobe is responsible for most of your executive function and reasoning, right? So if there's a delay there and growth in other parts of the brain, it means that a gifted child may be very bright about something like math or dinosaurs or show a lot of curiosity um, uh, and um, uh, and fascination with big concepts, but haven't yet developed the capacity to refine their own thinking and then to communicate that effectively. So think of gifted as both kind of a blessing and a curse, right? It means that for the state of Arizona, it's 3% of the population. For Tucson Unified School District, we test and place about 15 to 17% of the population in one of our service programs because we've broadened the definition to include students who typically are under-identified, and those are minority students, low-income students, and English language learners. So our district has expanded that pool so that we can apply these strategies to a larger population that may have been missed otherwise. And you can imagine if we know this about the gifted brain as being asynchronously developed, some of those students that I'm describing, especially low income students, they may not have been exposed to what we call cultural capital, things like regularly going to museums, having a library in their house, um, having deep conversations with parents who might be college educated. So there's already a cultural equity gap. And if you're an English language learner, you can imagine the gap might be even greater amongst your peers. So we take extra steps to make sure that we're providing opportunities for those students. So for gifted students, I've included with Lauren 3 links. She can either put it in the chat or just send an email following up, but they're really just easy touch points for you. One is all about gifted traits and characteristics. Another is from the National Association of Gifted Children, which provides even more resources. So one is from the Decision Lab, and they do a lot of work with gifted kids. The other is NAGC, National Association of Gifted Children, and that's about some of the GATE strategies. And so those are available to you if you wanted to dig any deeper in these topics. But the characteristics that at the Davidson Institute, davidsongifted.org, it describes how gifted children often stand out. So keep in mind, as I go through this and talk about some of these strategies that work well with gifted children, these are going to be strategies that work well with all children. It's true that we use them specifically because we recognize the power of these strategies when working with children who may not have that frontal lobe development. And so we find that certain methodologies help that student move towards success more confidently. But these strategies would be true for all kids. But the Davidson Institute just describes how gifted children often stand out. Um, uh, but you'll notice, right, something's different about them, right? It may be, again, they can't sit still in the classroom. They're always being distracted by things. We typically think of those kids as those like ADHD kids. It's true that many gifted kids also share some of those characteristics. And in fact, as our knowledge of giftedness continues to grow with new science and technology, right? We can take brain scans now of people thinking, and we can see what lights up when they think different things. And so we know that what I'm describing to you about this asynchronous development is true, and that it requires us to also think a little bit differently about how we approach those kids. And one of the things that we've learned is that when we describe kids as being like ADHD or they're hyperactive or they can't sit still or they're always asking questions before you've even started the lesson, or the kinds of questions they ask seem to be way off base. A lot of that just has to do with that asynchronous development. Um, and so in the link that I shared, there's an embedded link right on the front page where it says what is giftedness. And it says this neurological difference means that profoundly gifted students experience different intellectual, academic, and social emotional development than neurotypical individuals. And there's a link, the neuroscience of giftedness, which you might just find really interesting and can read on your own. Um, but I think a really great quote here is giftedness is an innate ability to both detect and comprehend the world in complex ways that differ significantly from age expected norms, right? So when you get a chance to work with students in the classroom, you might find a handful at any time of these students that are essentially neurodivergent. Maybe they haven't been identified, maybe they have, maybe they're on the borderline someplace, but you can just tell they're different. And probably in your own life experience, whether you've had a child like this, or a child's friend, or a sibling, or you yourself have experienced this, something more uh, direct than what I'm describing academically. Um, the common characteristics of gifted children, just really quickly: ability to comprehend material several grade levels above their age peers. That's true, but it's also true that gifted kids can be underachievers, right? It's also true that gifted students may struggle academically in an area because of that asynchronous development. Um, but they do almost always show surprising emotional depth and sensitivity at a young age. So, if you think back on any experience you've had in your life, even in your own childhood or with your children, or any of the work that you've done throughout your life and the work that you're doing now, if you think about those children that you've encountered that seem to be extra sensitive, that's probably a good sign that something's going on, because their sensitivity is probably based on the fact that they've thought thoughts that are big thoughts, like uh, where did we come from? Where are we going? How long do we have? And you can imagine, if you're a small child, that might feel really overwhelming. They tend to have a strong sense of curiosity. They can be enthusiastic and sometimes overly enthusiastic about unique interests and topics. I remember the first child that I worked with that was profoundly gifted. Um, I didn't really know anything about gifted education professionally. I'd been through the program, but I didn't really know much about it. And this was a child that was so fixated on dinosaurs. He was a first grader. He knew more about dinosaurs than I think most college students who had studied I mean, it was, I guess I'm presuming now he probably had something of a photographic memory, but his detail was immense. However, he wasn't interested in anything else, like absolutely nothing else. There was nothing that you could interest in him besides dinosaurs, and would get really upset if he couldn't spend time doing something with dinosaurs. So I had to shift my entire curriculum just for him. We call that differentiation now. So that he did dinosaur math, and he did dinosaur reading, and he did dinosaur writing, and he did dinosaur science. But there was just no way that he was going to do anything other. He was obsessed. And I don't know what's happened to him. I hope he's a dinosaur scientist to this day, right? Like, you really hope that that was the path for him. Um, Quirky or mature sense of humor. Yes, some of these kids will say the darndest things. You remember that show, The Children Say the Darndest Things? The the craziest things that come out of kids' mouths, those kids might be gifted, right? The ones who just say the most extreme, you just look at them and you go, what? Or wow, that's probably a sign of giftedness. Um, Creative problem solving and imaginative expression, absorbs information quickly, self aware, socially aware, and aware of global issues. Um, The interesting thing about awareness, right, is that if you're a 6 or 7 or 8-year-old gifted student, you might have the awareness, but not the capacity to express it or communicate it clearly. And that can be a source of real frustration for that student. And so on the same page, there's additional traits of giftedness links and so on. So this is just a really great resource if you end up having time and curiosity about the subject to go further. The other link that I shared is from the organization that I belong to, and I've spoken and attended some of their conferences, the National Association for Gifted Children. And it just goes through all the reasons why we have programming around these student needs and the different kinds of opportunities that are available to them, um, as well as different strategies in detail that you could also pursue at your leisure if interested. Most importantly, I think, is when you're encountering students that you think may be gifted, one thing you can do is, of course, ask the teacher if this child has been placed. We don't give teachers the scores, the raw scores of the students' aptitude on these cognitive ability tests, because we don't want to bias them around. Kind of like if you've ever thought about or been tested for IQ, you start getting all sorts of ideas about yourself or your peers or children that you may be working with just based on something like an IQ score, right? And so we don't give the score, we just give the category for what area they're gifted in. Um, any questions so far about that? So if you want to know if the child is gifted, you can find out from their teacher. They can at least tell you what they've been placed with, but it's not always true that those kids have been identified at any stage. But I strongly encourage you. Um, in our district, we employ something called talent development. And it's because we recognize that our test probably doesn't identify every child. And so we really actively encourage our teachers, our curriculum service provider professionals, our MTSS, those are the social emotional kind of counselor intervention specialists. We encourage all those people to keep their eyes open for that unidentified gifted kid,
Mm.
so that we can make sure that they get the kind of services they need.
Hey, Jeremy. We
Yeah.
actually have two questions in the chat.
Okay.
Val wanted to know, do gifted children relate better to adults than kids or vice versa?
Yes. Let's start with that one.
Okay.
So, so quite a bit of that has to do with how global their thoughts are, right? They're thinking big thoughts. And so those and their quirky sense of humor. So gifted children are often those who seem to gravitate towards adult conversation, right? So that's another way that you can identify. Like you walk in the classroom and this kid just wants to come up and just start talking about something with you. It's like, okay, that's probably a bit of a sign right there, right? So yes, they can also conversely, though, be if I haven't mentioned this yet, but in giftedness, right, we find that just as I was describing before, in the states that see giftedness as being part of special ed, our state doesn't. There's lots of reasons for that. It's actually not really helpful that they're not linked, because we have a large percentage of our gifted population that we would call twice exceptional. And we use the abbreviation 2E for those kids.
Uh-oh.
But they may just be somewhere on the spectrum. the further a child is on the spectrum, the less they will connect with their peers, the less they will connect with anybody. But they're more likely to connect with adults than their peers. So those are the things to look for and the reasons why. So
Thank you so much. The second question, I think, was referring back to kind of what you were talking about earlier. And the question is, do you pick a certain percentage from the special ed and low income students?
so we provide guaranteed testing in our district for all children in kindergarten. So we scoop all of them up. We make sure that we test everybody. And we offer multiple opportunities to test on the basis that that might have been a bad test day, or maybe they're coming into the district in second or third grade, or what have you. Again, our program, we specifically raised the bar, not raised the bar. We expanded the pool by insisting on identifying more kids as gifted than the state recognizes for funding purposes, right?
Mm.
The state recognizes about 3% for funding. We recognize about 17, like I said, 15 to 17%. But it's mostly because we recognize that there may be so many low income minority and ELL students that may not test well only because it's so foreign and strange to them to even sit down and take a 3-hour test. It's a very long test, right? So you have to be engaged and focused. And if these behaviors, if these habits of mind around reading and time on task and focus around text and and inquiry are not being modeled for children, they may not do well just because it's such a strange foreign thing to them. So we recognize that. In other words, there's always talk about whether or not tests are biased. I think the tests that we use try to get as much bias out as possible, but there really can be no replacement for exposure, right? So if you've grown up in an environment where, again, reading may not be something that goes on in your house, there may not be lengthy conversations, and you may not have high school or college educated family members or parents, then it might be less likely that you do well on these tests just for that reason alone. So we've just made sure to scoop up as many kids as we can.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah. All right.
I have a
So,
question. I have a
yeah.
question. Okay. Why did they come up with gifted as a name for this? I find that, okay, we get parents at the beginning of the school year. My child's gifted. Test them.
Yeah.
Well, they get tested and then they don't test into the program. And then
Yeah.
the parents get all indignant because what do you mean my child's not gifted? So
Oh, yeah.
why don't they call it something else?
Well, that's really interesting. Yeah, not only do you hear that, trust me, I hear it all the time, right? And especially when every child is gifted in some way, right? Every kid's special. And it is true that it may be, and we take this pretty seriously when we have recommendations from parents and teachers alike that, oh, this kid's, really gifted, they need to be in the program. We will give them multiple testing opportunities to see if that's true. However, I think there are two things to keep in mind. One is that one of the things that we've learned is that students who perform academically well, that is like a type A personality student, like you open the book, they read the book, they answer the questions, they raise their hands, right? That academic performance by itself is not necessarily an indicator. It could just be that you are really good at being a student, right? So we're careful about that. But to your question around the term gifted, that is a sore spot for anybody who's worked in this program. And I wish there were different words than gifted, and talented's probably still like talented at what? You could be talented at lots of things. Um, it's tricky. In fact, I was just at a gifted conference where the person speaking was talking about their own experience as a quote gifted student and how hard it was for them to relate to their peers on the basis that, oh, they're in that gifted program. And so it's problematic both ways. Both, oh, my kid's gifted because they started reading at age of 5. That may not be a sign of giftedness. That sounds counterintuitive, right? Oh, if you're reading really early, you must be gifted. That's not necessarily true. You could just have strong capacity for language, but maybe not enough to warrant the identification. And conversely, gifted could feel like a curse because it just becomes this terrible name to describe something that we don't really have a good word for. Even now when we talk about kids who are on the spectrum, or, a high IQ would be one way to describe it, but even that is, that has its own baggage associated with it, right? So yeah, to answer your question, Deborah, I don't know. I wish there was another word. If you can come up with one, let me know. But there have been many people trying to solve for, like, how do we describe these kids? Differently abled. There really isn't a good way to describe them. But gifted, I always say, the way I deal with it is I always say, well, true giftedness is like any other gift. It's a blessing and a curse, right? Like, the more you are given, the more is expected of you. And the more potential you have, the more that's expected of you. The more, well, just as if you think about in life, right? Those with the most should share with the few, and so on. So I think that the notion of giftedness as a language challenge, I think, is important. So I'm not diminishing it at all. I will say this. What we do know is that converse to the idea that if you're gifted, you must be high achieving, right? The fact is that within the identified gifted population, those who are identified as gifted have higher risks of dropping out, of going to prison, of drug use, and suicide or suicidal ideation. So they're an at-risk population ultimately. And so I think that's why I wanted to just to close this answer with, so giftedness is also misleading because you forget the blessing curse part of it, is that, there is a real challenge to this, because you still need to be a motivated person. You still need to have certain skills of organization and follow through and problem solving and communication. And in fact, in many cases, the more gifted you are, the harder it is to do those things comfortably. The more frustrated you can be with other people. And the more you can feel like you're not seen and heard for who you really are. And so, yeah, I hate the name, and I wish there was a better one.
I have a question.
Yes.
Really important.
Yeah.
Okay. Our school, the one I work in, doesn't have a gifted program. And I lost a student. I'm sure he was gifted. He hits everything on the high note and reading and talking college level, but his reading level was supposedly 4th, which is the grade he was in, because he just get on the computer and just punch buttons randomly to get through it fast. He was hyper. He drove the teacher nuts. I said, do you have any books at home? Oh, we have a library, about 600. I go, okay. His parents are both professionals.
Yeah.
And he was, he'd like to read certain things, but the books they gave him in that AR development or whatever were so bad. There weren't any scientific. It was all stories. I don't like that. I want to learn stuff.
Right.
And
Right.
so
Yeah.
he was driving the teacher nuts. I helped him a little bit, and he got so frustrated in school, he left. He
Yeah.
says, I think I'm going to go be homeschooled. And I says, that might be better for you,
Yeah.
because they don't have it at our school. How do you get them to implement one? They
Yeah.
have special ed for the kids that need extra help and just basics or developmentally delayed, but they have
Yeah.
nothing for gifted. And I saw so many wastes.
Yeah. That's um that's a tragedy. Obviously, we would hope that all all programs. So what I'm describing, Victoria, when I'm describing giftedness, like this is well established. For
Mhm.
districts to not provide support programs for this population seems unconscionable. I don't really understand it. It seems like it should be a requirement, but again,
Yeah, it does.
because the state of Arizona decoupled giftedness from special ed, the only incentive for a school district to identify those students and then provide services for them is a very, very small financial one. And it's only going to be at about 3% of the population. That's how the state identifies those kids. And a smaller school district or a rural school district or whatever,
Rural. It's
right?
very rural.
They're really not going to have for the for the for the cost, like cost benefit analysis. They'd have to have a trained, endorsed, gifted teacher be able to probably provide some kind of pull out services for those kids at all grade levels or small rural district. So that's a FTE, a full-time employee that they'd have to hire and have trains. And their budget, the state of Arizona is also 49th in teacher pay, and I think 47th or maybe even now 50th, somewhere in there, of the per pupil allocation. So it may just be dollars and cents. They just don't have the resources. So it's another reason why I really encourage anybody working in those environments for themselves to go get armed with some information so that they can more accurately and appropriately work with those students. And you're describing a child who would be a perfect candidate for
Yes,
for
he
for
would have
gifted
flown.
support, right? So just I want to be conscientious of time. I am going to give you a strategy today that's a takeaway strategy that you will be able to use with students like that.
Can't hear you. Can't hear you.
Your audio cut out for a second, Jeremy.
Okay. Yeah, I couldn't
Now,
hear it.
my connection's unstable.
Okay.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, my connection was just lost for a second, so sorry about
Okay.
that. Um,
I asked the principal about it because I saw a couple of kids I thought would probably do well there. And he said that this rural area, the parents didn't want the kids like separated, or, they have the smart ones. But I'm sitting here, that doesn't make sense because they pull out the slow learners, the developmentally delayed, and spend all kinds of hours and time with them.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I mean, so the primary mover of that, Victoria, is funding.
Probably
If gifted ed were within special ed, that funding would exist, but it's not in the state. But also, Victoria, because parents do feel like their child might be stigmatized by this identification and pull out. And so we struggle with that ourselves in our district. Parents who turn down the placement because they just don't want the child to be thought of as different than their peers. Now, if they are different, right, their peers are going to think differently of
They
them
know.
anyway, right?
Yeah,
And yeah, so that's always a challenge. But I was maybe I cut out when I was saying today I want to honor your time, and I want to make sure that I give you this takeaway strategy,
good.
Victoria, so that when you do encounter a child like this, there's at least something that you can do with them, that will feel really engaging to them. And this works with all kids, but gifted kids in particular. So,
Okay.
Lauren, if
Thank
it's
you.
if it's okay with you, I wanted to segue into talking about Scamper a little bit.
Absolutely. Let's move
Okay,
forward.
terrific. So the other link that we're going to share with you is all about Scamper. So Scamper is an anagram that stands for something else, but it's such an easy thing to remember, like scampering away, right? And what's great about Scamper as a technique, you're going to have a link that gives you all this information, but I'm going to focus specifically on a couple aspects of it. First of all, for all of you, I think
The scamper method is in the chat, and Jeremy, your audio has cut out again. So we'll just give it a second. Take this time. If you can pull your chat up, everybody, click the link and you can see what Jeremy's talking about.
okay.
There
Can you
we
hear
go.
me all right now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I think you would all appreciate the history of Scamper because you're all old enough to remember some of the things I'm going to describe, right? So Scamper goes all the way back to about 1938 and was formalized in 1953 in a book called Applied Imagination. And it's really it was developed by the man who is considered to have invented brainstorming. So we've all talked about like, oh, let's brainstorm something, right? But the idea of brainstorming has an origin point, right? It hasn't existed forever. It is a way of problem solving, and it happened within the last 100 years. So think up was a process that a group would undertake to find a solution to a problem. So they would amass a range of ideas in a spontaneous setting. There were some important principles behind the process. No ideas should be criticized. Wild and outlandish ideas were encouraged. The group should try to come up with a large number of ideas, and group members should try to build on each other's ideas, right? So already, Victoria, you can see. So if you've got a child who has a lot of ideas about things, you want to encourage them to express those ideas and say, hey, there's no such thing as a bad idea. I'll give you just an example of how this has been applied in our lifetimes more concretely. So in 1971, a writer and educator published a book called Scamper, Games for Imagination Development. And I have a copy of that original book, as a matter of fact, right? And the acronym was a really good way for people to quickly and easily sink their teeth into this strategy. This strategy has been used, obviously, since the 50s um, in corporate America. And I'll give you an example. So let's say I'm the president now of Mars Inc., not the planet, the candy bar. Okay. So Mars Inc., we make candy bars. And I've got you all are now you're my marketing team, my advertising team, my creative director team, my candy inventor team. You represent each one of those departments. And I get you in the room and I say this. All right, everybody, we need a new candy bar. Sales are down. We need a new candy bar. Give me your best ideas for a new candy bar. And you'll see now this scamper technique is perfectly designed to have these kinds of conversations, right? So scamper stands for S, substitute, C, combine, A, adapt, M, modify, P, put to another use, E, eliminate, R, reverse. Scamper. You don't have to write it down or remember it because it's in the link. Now, in our meeting right now, I'm going to say, let's just focus on the first three. Substitute, combine, adapt. So we already have a candy bar. I need a new one. We're the Mars company. Can you give me an example right now of candy that demonstrates that something was substituted for something else, combined with something else, or adapted into something else? Just 3 candy bars. M&Ms, who said that? Val, where are you, Val? All right. Pez. Okay, these are great, right? Okay, so let's just do the M&M. Val, that was excellent. Which one of you is Val? Let's see. Raise your hand, Val. I just want to see. I'm looking at the names, but I can't. White chocolate Kit Kats. Okay, so you get it, right? So sure enough, so let's just say, oh, whoever said M&Ms, I just gave you $1 million bonus in today's meeting because you just came up with $1 billion idea, right? Then one of you raises your hand and says, well, what if we combine chocolate and peanut butter? We'd end up with a Reese's cup, or we'd end up with what is it, a peanut butter M&M or a peanut M&M? And I go, great, another $1 million idea, because that's $1 billion industry too, right? And so you can see in the world of M&Ms with nuts, you're right. See, like, so all I did was substitute, combine, and adapt. So we know these techniques sitting around brainstorming with grown-ups where they're incentivized to go make money by coming up with something new. Like we've had one wheel. But when you put that wheel to another use, it becomes a cog, right? So you can just imagine most of what we've done as civilization has been to scamper things, right? Somebody came up with a wheel and then we scampered the wheel and turned the wheels into cogs and so on and so forth. Well, we've done that with candy. We've done it with you name it. Somebody said once, I think there's only like 3 kinds of stories in the world, right? And so all those stories have been scampered too. All the heroes have been scampered. All the plots have been scampered, right? So scamper is just a funny way to describe what we do naturally if given the opportunity to share our thoughts and ideas as outrageous as possible. If you said Skittles, right? Oh, what if we took the M&M and instead of putting chocolate in the middle, we put some other kind of sweet tart thing? Okay, great. Another $1 million bonus goes out to you. And that's right. It seems so silly. Somebody put the white chocolate Kit Kats, right? But if you're a fan of Kit Kat, you just open up a whole new marketplace by making it white chocolate. And believe it or not, these are the kinds of ideas that are generated in boardrooms all the time. And it takes so much money to invest. Can you imagine to switch your production from milk chocolate to white chocolate is actually not a little thing to do. It takes tons of engineering shifts and supply shifts, and now you got to market it different. Like the amount of investments you need to make is going to be very great. Luckily, in a classroom with kids, we don't have to worry about investing anymore, right? But you can imagine if in the real world, you want ideas to be so resonant that it almost becomes kind of a fait accompli. Like, oh, if we don't engineer this to make the to the white chocolate Kit Kat, we're going to lose money, right? So we better invest money so we can make it. So I just love that in the first place, this is something that is easily recognizable to anybody as like, oh yeah, now I know it's called something, right? I just substituted something for something else. Oh, great question. It just came up in the chat. Is it better to put these kids in a group when we teach them, or is it better one-on-one? It is better in a group. It is better in a group. And to Victoria's question about that child, you're going to often, I think the environment you're going to encounter these kids is in their mainstream classroom.
Mhm.
And so the best grouping for those kids in a mainstream classroom is that you might end up with a gifted student or two, and then a couple other kids. But now you're providing the freedom for the craziest, zaniest stuff to come out, right? So I often will do things with those kids where I'll just say, I I've done the Mars Corporation experiment with kids. Like, okay, Mars Candy Bar sent us a letter to TUSD and asked us to come up with the new candy. And so, you know, they want us to use this technique that they use to make sure that we're on the right track. So we're going to scamper it, briefly show them SCA, go through it, write it out, and just say, okay, give me examples of things that have already been scampered. And sure enough, they'll say things like, oh, it's the peanut M&Ms, or it's the Kit Kat, or it's the Snickers bar, or it's the right, like, yeah, those are all scampered versions of the same thing, right? So when you've started like that, now you can say, okay, so what we want to do is we don't want to do something that's been done already. So we're going to have to, put on our thinking caps, be really imaginative. And now we do the brainstorming, right? Which is nothing's crazy, and then you keep refining and refining, saying, okay, is that an example of a substitution? Is that a sample of a combination? Is that example of an adaptation? Or is it more than one? And the benefit of this with children is that you just get the greatest conversations. The kids say the darndest things, and you'll just get, oh yeah, my mom loves M&Ms. In fact, she has like M&Ms dispensers all over her office or something like that, right? Or my favorite candy is whatever. I mean, it's just a great way to get it going. Then that technique, that strategy of scamper, you can use for anything. So let's take another example. Let's say they're reading, Victoria, that child who is having to read the dull book in fourth grade, right? What if you had an opportunity to say, well, how would you make it more interesting? Let's scamper this book. Let's substitute this character for another character. Let's combine some attributes of these characters. Let's make the hero an anti-hero and adapt the plot so that, and you can see, right? Let's make it an adventure story. Let's, like, you create your own adventure out of this, and let's use these techniques, and it helps you frame the conversation with them. How does that sound so far to everybody? And so the link in here gives you, so I'm just going to go through. There's a section that talks about consequences. Innovation is what drives progress, right? That's a true statement. Every field relies on creative thinkers to fuel change and improvement. So one of the framing devices with students today, I just had a conversation with my son, who is turning 11. We were driving in the car, and he said, Dad, what happens when the robots take over? And I said, oh, well, that's not happening anytime soon. And he said, well, it's going to happen in my lifetime. And he said, and what about AI? And I said, well, that is already taking jobs. Okay, this is a valid question, right? And I said, well, the best thing you can hope for is that you are one of the innovators drives progress, right? That you are a creative thinker that is the person that's designing or programming these machines to do work. So my sons wanted to be a firefighter for years, right? And he said, well, but the robots, they're going to make robots who can be really good firefighters, right? I don't know if I'm silent, Lauren. Did I go silent? Okay.
No,
Okay.
everybody is nodding their heads. They're
Okay.
they're on the same page.
So he said, well, robots are going to start fighting fires, right? And I said, well, yeah, probably. Okay, so if you're a firefighter, let's say there's five firefighters on your crew, maybe one of them is a robot. Maybe there's the robot dog that goes and pulls people out. And I said, but there's going to need to be somebody who designs the robots. There's going to be somebody who needs to keep the robots working properly. There's going to need to be somebody um, uh, that still has the human perspective on making evaluative judgments that are beyond that particular robot's programming, and so on and so on. So I turned his anxiety about like, oh no, AI and robots are going to rule the world, and said, well, let's hope some of us are still around to rule the robots. And who would those people be? Well, they're going to be the ones um, who are always trying to imagine what the world could be and have the skills, the creative problem solving, the innovation, and so on. Yeah, okay, Ben, that's excellent, right? We're already using some in law enforcement. That's absolutely right. And so here's a quote from the article. It says Thomas Edison famously said, there's a way to do it better, right? Find it. So there will always, hopefully, will always be better ways to do things, and you want to be the one that's helping find it. And so Scamper is often used to improve products, but it's also good to adapt and improve scientific processes, methodologies. I gave you the example of Skynet. Yeah, well, he has not been exposed to Terminator level movies yet, so yeah, maybe his cynicism will rise after that because he'll be like, "No, it's all prophesized." But in any case, um, uh, so Scamper technique is something that is applied across the board in boardrooms, in science laboratories, and so on. And so I just encourage you to have that in your back pocket. Um, uh, I do want.
Okay, we're just gonna give it a second, let the technology catch back up with us. Just gonna wait a second.
People hold back extravagant ideas for fear of judgment, and people don't want to disrupt the status quo. Oh yeah, huge vacuum cleaner robot at the well, somebody has to run that robot, that's sure. Um, uh, so that being said, um, between the small groups of kind of informal um, uh, kind of inquiry practices, it's also possible to send children on individually to Scamper themselves. Like you can make and get an easy Scamper worksheet, have them pick a subject that they want to improve on, and then have them work on that individually too, so that you can get those nonverbal or shy kids to express. I do want to give you one last takeaway because I gave the Mars example, but I want to give you the um, yes, and I was just asked, is it okay to add different grade levels to work together? Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, I'm a strong advocate for multi-age grouping. I think older kids with younger kids, that's the way culture thrives. The fact that we isolate kids by age in our modern classroom is really foreign and alien to human development. So as often as you can do that, absolutely. So in this article, the one that I have the link to, I gave you the made up Mars one, but here's a McDonald's scamper success, right? They McDonald's demonstrated many scamper techniques they've used to modify and improve their brand over the years, right? One component of scampers that McDonald's has mastered is substitute. While their original menu only included hamburgers, cheeseburgers, fries, milkshakes, and other beverages. Do you remember back when that's all McDonald's was? Um, Today, there's over 100 McDonald's menu items. They took the hamburger and thought of different ingredients that could substitute. Okay, what if we made a chicken sandwich? What if we made a fish sandwich? And in fact, they do that now, right? And just recently, I think they changed the recipe of the oil they cook the fries in for health reasons. And that was just a process of the laboratory sitting down and going, okay, what can we substitute? What we can combine? What can we adapt, right? So I think the fact that it has real world concrete examples, it shows children that this is the world of adults. This is what adults have been doing for thousands of years, to come up with new ideas, whether they're frivolous like a candy bar, or a hamburger, or all the way to the space shuttle or COVID-19 mRNA technology. This is something that people do, even if they're not aware they're doing it. And so giving children an opportunity to be that level of thinkers, give them the platform to be like, hey, we have an opportunity to create and invent. In Bloom's taxonomy, this is a fancy education application. We say create is the highest level or highest order of thinking skills, right? To be creative, to be inventive, to do something that hasn't been done before. And so anytime with gifted kids, you can give them that opportunity to take thoughts in their head. So the boy I was describing is the dinosaur kid. I can scamper a dinosaur with him, right? I can say, okay, and by the way, if you look at evolutionary biology, many of the evolutionary shifts between one dinosaur and another is kind of a scamper anyway, right? That was substituted for this. This was adapted from that. This was modified. The horn became a tusk, became a, right? And so we have examples around us all the time, and it's a quick, easy way in to having those kinds of conversations with kids that really get them to apply their highest order level thinking, and in a way that's really supportive. And that's why those relationships you foster with them around safety and being seen and being respected is the foundation for all those kinds of things that you can do with them, because they're more willing to take risks when they feel safe.
Boy I was talking about, he had his ideas. He wasn't afraid to express them. What he was really interested in is changing human DNA to improve human beings, physically, strength wise, mentally, a lot of stuff like that. And he was interested. That's what all he really wanted to talk about. He just wasn't interested in the school subjects at all.
That's right. Well, the real advantage that you all have in your role and capacity, I hope, is to not just, I mean, obviously there are going to be many circumstances where you're needed to help support those struggling learners, right? Here's the curriculum. They're having a hard time with it. There are all sorts of different strategies and approaches specific to that. In the instances when you get those kids that we've been talking about who don't need all that emphasis on the curriculum, but need opportunities, Victoria, to break out of that mental prison of what they're expected to do all day. What a great opportunity to team them up with a couple other kids and let them be the star, not the troublemaker, but the one who has really profound insights that the other kids are like, wow, that's so cool. Because you give them scamper and you say, great, let's scamper the human DNA. What would we start with substituting? What would we start with adapting? So yeah, I think, again, these things work for all kids. They certainly work for teachers, but I think for small group pull-out sessions, and if you've got strong students, gifted students, along with kids who are struggling with the curriculum, this is an opportunity to not have to reinforce the kind of learning they're already doing, but to give them a fresh approach and an opportunity that says there is no right answer to this, right? In fact, you're celebrated for being as far out as possible, right? Whereas mostly in learning, what gets you applause and laudits from your teacher is to, how well did you color inside the lines?
Right.
Not how wildly did you go outside. So yeah.
Thank you.
Dove, did you have a question? I see you came off mute.
I had a comment.
Mhm.
It seems really interesting to hear that multi-levels in the same room is helpful for a child learning, because I grew up in small country and in church schools where we had like 3 or 4 grades to the room. And I always thought that the kids were really lucky that got to have a classroom with just their grade. And now I'm hearing, well, it's helpful for learning to have multi-grades,
Yeah,
That's
well, there
surprising
are.
to me.
Yeah, well, Florian, there are programs, curricula specifically designed around multi-age groupings. But I would say, like, if we just put I kind of appreciate your perspective, right? Like, the grass must be greener somewhere else. Like, you were stuck with all those other kids, and like, oh, you get to spend time with your peers. How exciting, right? That is somewhat true. But if you think about some of this just kind of falls into common sense. If you think about how learning really takes place, right? Most learning, when we don't put a name or label on it or put it into a formal scope and sequence curriculum, most learning happens naturally and organically by what? By watching others, copying what they do. If you're lucky, the other is older, wiser, better at it than you are. They're modeling how to do it well and then helping, assisting, facilitating you're doing it well. So thousands of years of human civilization, really modern education is like it's a blink in an eye. Most of our education has been what I just described, which is effectively like an apprenticeship model, where kids at different ages are being given different tasks based on what they can do and then some. And then over time, getting better and matriculating up so that they become the master craftsperson in that skill set. So my grandfather had an 8th grade education. He had never been in an airplane or an elevator. He was born in the house he died in, and he successfully ran a 250-acre farm growing beets, beans, corn, wheat. And this is from the 1930s all the way into the 1980s, which means that he had to start with just the bare bone essential for how to farm, right? Really simple machines, all the way to sophisticated machines and complicated chemical mixtures for pesticides and planting schedules and seed types and so on and so on. So he had to continuously learn and grow, but his foundation was so strong because he learned his craft from his own father and from his father and so on. And so there's really, we're trying to, in modern society, we try to replace all that hand-me-down knowledge and experience, right? You can imagine I'm describing, oh, you want to establish a relationship with your learners so that you can get them to take chances. Well, if you're growing up with the people who are teaching you your craft and skill, they probably have opportunities for you to try something new. Like, okay, you're going to get to decorate this part of the, right? Or I'm going to give you an acre for you to start managing and make decisions about what you're growing and your crop and so on. So, this would have been part of a common experience. Now, in formal modern education, we have to essentially manufacture for children the things that would have been innately or organically present in their life. And so that's our great challenge. And I think it's one of the reasons why, honestly, I think we're seeing attendance in school drop. And we're seeing performance drop. In fact, this is the first generation of learners in American history, recorded American history, that is underperforming their parents' generation in terms of reading, writing, and arithmetic. So up until now, we've had a steady growth curve, right? And that makes a certain amount of sense because, like I said, my grandfather was only required to get to the 8th grade. He wouldn't have needed more than that. And it would have been very rare for somebody to not start working at, 10, 12, 13. And so we've been a success story in that we've been able to replace those systems with enough academic rigor and engagements to ensure that we had children that were exceeding their parents' generation. But now we're seeing that go down. And I think it's probably because we've reached a kind of fundamental tipping point in how much can be taught and mastered in that environment, given what the real needs of the world are, right? We've moved towards making sure that every kid goes to college, when in fact we need able-bodied plumbers and electricians and firefighters and nurse practitioner. Like, we need all sorts of other people doing all sorts of other jobs. And one thing that you can do when working with kids, besides just identifying the gifted kids, is just identifying any kid who seems to have a special talent in an area and encouraging them to really nurture it, even if it's not academic. And so much of the pressure we put on students is in academics. But that's a narrow band of most people's lived experience. And so these are the challenges, and it's another great reason to have all of you in kids' lives, because you can also tell them about the time when it was like the world really has changed a lot, and there are talents and abilities you possess simply because of your age, because you've grown up in a different time in which more was probably expected of you outside of a strictly academic performance environment. And the whole child is really missing from most of our education. So anything you can do that. Yep. There you go, John. You're absolutely right. So besides the focus on gifted for today is just looking at any of these characteristics and attributes of students that stand out as being ready to be nurtured. And the beauty of what you get to do in your program is that either in small groups or one-on-one is that you get to nurture that child. That's why I start with saying, hear them, see them, show up for them, whatever that may look like. Oh, Rachel, you're on mute, but go ahead and unmute.
Okay. No, my daughter was in the gifted program in Chicago. And my other daughter, who was gifted, who was an artist, we got her into the right school. It's called, it's a School of the Arts.
Mm-hmm.
And she went on to San Francisco, is now a muralist.
Oh, wonderful.
I didn't realize that. The other daughter is now a doctor, a surgeon. So she's happy.
Wow.
So I was very blessed. But to find out about these schools, we had to do a lot of research. And I want to know more about your situation because I have that dinosaur child. I used to have that dinosaur child in my classroom.
Okay. And so, yeah, Rachel, and in fact, I encourage all of you. Lauren will share my email and contact information.
Great.
And anytime during the school year, that's why I said talent development is such a big part of this. If you notice something, if you see
I did.
something, yeah, and you want to,
Definitely.
yeah,
Definitely.
we can follow up and try to reach out to parents. Again,
That would be great.
some parents will reject placement because initially because they just don't want their child perceived as different. They don't want them missing class time. There's like lots of reasons for it. But with extra information, we can certainly do more outreach and have
Okay.
conversations. So,
All
yeah.
right. I would love that. Our friend.
Yeah, I just want to add, John put something in the chat real quick about the villain kid in Toy Story, the one who took all
Yes,
the
yes,
toys.
yes, yes.
Okay, well, it's interesting because, by the way, I saw a really funny article about this because Toy Story 5 is coming out, right?
That's
But I
right.
saw a really interesting article about this was like, why is that kid the villain? Isn't he just like a creative, imaginative, right? He kind of is, right? Like, why does he have to be the bad guy just because he wants to? Well, the only reason why he's the bad kid is because it turns out all the toys have feelings and they don't like what's done to them. But we know that toys are inanimate objects. So technically the kid in Toy Story should be like that kid's the hero. He's the most imaginative. He's not playing with them as they are. And in fact, he doesn't run any risk the way the other child, I can't remember the kid's name, but the one who owns Woody and Buzz, right?
Andy.
That child's just, he's going to grow out of his toys, and he is going to put them. But the other child is going like, oh no, the sky's the limit. I can just keep scampering these things and creating all new universes, right? And yet in our culture, even amongst artists who created Toy Story, who are all imaginative, creative people, made the imaginative, creative character in the story a villain. So go figure, right? Oh, the Lego movie is another great. Well, in that case, right? It's who is it? The Crackle, the overlord who wants to glue everything together and keep it in place. And you can't play with the Legos imaginatively. You can only do it one way. And the whole theme of that story, right, is like, no, free play, be as wild and crazy as you can be. In fact, most of these stories have these elements of scamper in it, right? Because you're going to combine, substitute, adapt, modify. So yeah, those are all excellent examples, by the way, that you can use with your student learners when having these conversations, because they'll immediately recognize. And by the way, the last thing I'd add to all of this is that I didn't really talk about depth and complexity, but in those gifted attributes, we're talking about like thinking big thoughts, right? And most of their learning in class is going to be very shallow, right? Just the facts. And when you get to work with these children, here's the opportunity to say, let's go beyond the facts. Let's analyze this situation. Let me ask you a question. Do you think the boy in Toy Story is a villain? Why is he a villain? Isn't he like having those kinds of conversations with kids is always a way into their true self. And they just don't get lots of opportunities to do that with our structured curriculum these days. There's a lot of time that kids are expected to be taught to as opposed to learned with. And so anything you can do to be the person that's listening and having those conversations, the better for those kids, for sure. And I know that Lauren had some things that she wanted to make sure that she was touching on with you for your program. So I don't know if Lauren, this is a good time we wanted to check for any other questions, comments, or concerns before you guys use the rest of your time for your own your own program.
Yeah, does anyone have any more comments or questions specifically for Jeremy? We're going to share our takeaways here in a second, but if anybody wants specifically to ask Jeremy a question, now is a good time. Anita in the chat said, might a savant be considered as gifted?
Yes.
Can you
That's another term that's been applied over time.
can you explain what a savant is for those who don't know?
Well, so a savant, it's interesting because it's kind of close to what Rachel was describing. When you are hyper focused on a narrow specific thing, and it's almost like the depth and breadth of your knowledge is one outsized to your age or your relative experience, but it's almost always like a specialty. Like a savant is seen as like, a musical savant or a artistic savant or a scientific savant, that it's somebody that has like a very strong but narrowly focused kind of fixation and talent for something.
May I add to why I asked that question? I mentioned last week about a little boy that I work with, and we just thought he was like nonverbal. He did not speak. The most he might say, okay, yes, even if he didn't understand, he would not give back or participate in what we're learning. But I work with him one-on-one. And the first time I thought maybe he might be gifted is that, the teacher had tasks that he had to do. We had to complete them, and he was distracted and looking around, but he was getting it, which was amazing to me, and keeping time. There was no clock in front of him. So the teacher said, keep him for about 15 minutes. And it was like a clock in his head was keeping track of the time. And he said, oh, 10 more minutes. Oh, 5 more minutes, 2 more minutes. I mean, and I'm looking at my clock and he's a point on. It was so weird. And then the other thing was that she said that she wanted him to learn adding 10 adding 1 to 10 or 2 to 10 or taking away 1 from 10. And he wasn't grasping it. So I used manipulatives. She said if he does 4 of the problems, great, and there were like 10 problems for each of the different categories. And once he got it, he was doing it in his head. He stopped using the manipulatives. He was holding the manipulatives in his hand, but he wasn't manipulating them. He was just popping out the answers as we
Yeah,
went. So
I think you just described a gifted kid. I'll say
yeah.
this. It is also true that remember I was describing like the attributes, characteristics of a gifted child in ways that you can see them. I'm so glad, Anita, that you brought this encounter up, because one of the things I didn't describe are these profoundly nonverbal gifted kids.
Mhm.
They're often completely missed. In fact, most teachers will think that they're low functioning
Yeah,
students
that's what he's been categorized.
because they're nonverbal.
Mm-hmm.
But you just described his sense of time and things like using the manipulatives and then quickly recognizing it and going into mental math
Right.
probably shows like a really strong um, visual, spatial recognition, pattern recognition,
Mm-hmm.
things that he may not have vocabulary for. And if he is quiet and reticent and nonverbal, those things are really easy to miss,
Right.
especially since so much of instruction doesn't provide him opportunities to learn hands-on. We call it hands-on, minds-on, but
Mm-hmm.
it used to be that manipulatives, especially in both language, but primarily in maths, um, was a foundation of early childhood. It's it's been reduced over time because of the demand of curriculum to make sure that students start doing rote math calculations or reading and writing exercises at earlier and earlier ages. So you'll notice kindergarten used to be almost all social interactive play and use of manipulatives. It is not that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And and it's because of the pressure that was placed on the idea that, well, by the time they graduate high school, we need college students. So that meant that at the bottom, kindergarten had to be elevated academically. But most of our data over decades now and a lot of research on development says that things like reading, writing, and arithmetic may not really crystallize in the mind until about second or third grade anyway. And the more opportunity you give kids to explore, create, invent, make things in general, gives them a stronger foundation and engagement so that when they do have to do more of the academic pursuits, they have a stronger foundation, not only um, uh, in the mechanics, but in their own sense of place within the system, right? Because they've had more chances to be expressive and uniquely expressive.
So then he grabs me in the hallway. Hello, hello, hello. He wants to say hello to me. He comes out of
Yeah,
the
he does, because you showed up for him and you gave him an opportunity to be seen. So
right.
I think that's an excellent example, Anita. So
Yeah,
now that that's happened, this is a child that you would want to make sure that you just keep exploring possibilities with, because
right,
I bet
right.
there's a lot
Yeah.
that he has had not enough opportunity to share and express with others, or to even unlock in himself, because
Right.
he just hasn't had that kind of time spent.
And he would get frustrated. But now, when we did that exercise with the math, I said, well, your teacher said we can stop at, just do a few. He said, no, I want to keep on. This is fun.
Excellent. That's what you want to see. By the way, you also bring up and I should have said this, and I'm glad that we kept talking. One of the interesting characteristics of gifted students is that they can be also prone to, we talked about their sensitivities, right? But they can also be prone to perfectionism. And that perfectionism can, in some cases, be so profound that they will not verbalize or take chances and show others what they're doing, because they have the perfect concept picture model in their minds, and making mistakes for them is unacceptable. And so you'll also see that come out as well. So if you see a real perfectionist kid struggling, they're placing such a high standard on themselves because they can visualize it, but they can't quite communicate it. And that gap can really cause them anxiety and
Right.
embarrassment.
I noticed the ones that don't want to take the chance. I said, this is a safe place. If you get the answer wrong, it's okay. We work together. And so
Excellent.
then, they quietly say things. They said, it's okay. You're fine.
Well,
Thank
like I
you.
was saying to everyone, thank you so much for the work that you do and for showing up for these kids. And we're always looking to recruit talent like yourselves to work with our students. So, like we said, Lauren will have all my information. Thank you all so much, and I'll be signing off. And I hope to hear from you, and I'd love to hear any more stories this year. And if you are anywhere in TUSD, let me know, and I'll show up at one of your schools when you're there. And if you are in an environment where it's rural and you don't have nearly the kind of support you're looking for, reach out to me as well, and I'll see if I can't continue to give you resources and feedback.